Good morning. It is 6:39 a.m. on Thursday, January 21st, 2021. I am Christiana Ellis and I just got up. This is 5 more minutes. So, obviously, big things happening in the news yesterday. I'm not going to spend too much time on it except as to say that I definitely think people shouldn't act like all the problems of the world are solved because they're obviously not. But at least one seems resolved. So I'm happy about that. But now I'm going to move on and talk about the Karate Kid, specifically the Karate Kid movies, because I have recently rewatched them. I mentioned this back when I rewatched the first one. But, seeing people talk about enjoying the Cobra Kai show made me feel like I wanted to revisit the movies, and I hadn't seen them in a long time. So let's recap. Right, the four that I watched: the Karate Kids one, two, Karate Kid 1, 2, and 3, and then the next Karate Kid. Those are all the ones that have Pat Morita as Mr. Miyagi. I didn't ever actually see at all the Jackie Chan one, despite liking Jackie Chan. Maybe I should watch it just to complete the set, so to speak. But part of what I was thinking in my head is that I wanted to watch all of the ones that were sort of canon in the Cobra Kai show before I start that show. Even though my understanding is that that show actually includes lots of recaps and I probably wouldn't have been lost at all. But I wanted to revisit the movies regardless. So, like I said when I first rewatched the first one, the first Karate Kid is legitimately great. I think it's a classic, and honestly, I think it's probably underrated these days. Um, I think it's, if you haven't watched it in a long time, I think it's actually, if you rewatch it now, you'll find it's better than you even remember. That's how I felt rewatching it anyway, and I hadn't seen it in a long time. Um, I think it ages pretty well. I think the chemistry for all the different players is great. There's some nice complexity and nuance in some elements of it, and I think it's really great. So then from there we get into the ones I'm not sure there's a lot of people who would even really disagree much on that, right? It would be just a matter of degree. It would, of like, okay, well, no, not really many people would say it's bad, but from there, lots of people might say all the sequels are bad. But let's talk about it. So, The Karate Kid Part 2 is a movie where, if you don't recall, the premise is that, Daniel is still training with Mr. Miyagi following the tournament. And in fact, the movie picks up uh, like both 2 and 3, somewhat surprisingly to me, literally begin with a TV show style previously on, literally showing clips from the previous movies to sort of say, hey, remember these people? I feel like movies don't do that anymore. I suppose it's because anymore people have much more ability to rewatch a movie readily, when maybe that wasn't as true in the 80s. I mean, I know that it wasn't. Um, so that makes sense, I guess. But even still, I feel like a lot of other movies that had sequels at the time didn't do that either. So it's interesting, I think. But in any event, so we had the big tournament where Daniel won. We take a little bit of time at the beginning to sort of deal with the fallout of the Cobra Kai sensei, Kreese, kind of losing it, and Mr. Miyagi having to specifically, try to stop him from hurting his own students. And this is where we first really see Mr. Miyagi. Like, I guess we saw him beat up Johnny and the others when they were ambushing Daniel previously, but what we get is a lesson about, mercy as a direct opposition to, the Cobra Kai no mercy slogan. I'm taking too long to do this. This is gonna. I can't spend this much time on all of them. What I'll say is, Mr. Miyagi learns that his father is dying, and so he and Daniel both go together to Okinawa. And then we have the story play out there. And so, what I'll say about two is that there are a lot of elements about the plot that feel pretty contrived. And the idea of the mean old businessman who's taking it out on the poor, helpless villagers it's a little cartoony. And then it gets even more cartoony from there in terms of like that that dude's villainous nephew and that sort of thing. So some of that's not the best, but there's some legitimately great stuff in part two. And so I don't think it's certainly not as solid as the first one, but it's got some very good stuff in there. I think it's absolutely worth a rewatch if you're revisiting the movies in general. So then we get to part three. And part three was kind of a fascinating watch for me because on the one hand, before rewatching it, I would have told you that I like really barely remember anything about it. And yet, when I watched it, it felt like when you go up to the attic and you discover a box full of toys that you had forgotten all about from your childhood, but then now as that you see them and they're in front of you again, it's like, oh my God, I remember these. I feel like I must have watched that movie a couple of dozen times when I was, 12 or whatever. Let's see, I think that movie was 1989, so I would have been 11 when it came out. So probably 12 or 13 when it was, when I would have been watching it at home on TV. And I found that even though I would have told you in advance of rewatching that I didn't remember, like, I knew every plot beat like the back of my hand when it finally showed up. But it was like I never saw it coming. It was more just like it would happen and I'd say, oh yeah. Now, that sort of tidal wave of surprise nostalgia was unexpected. I will say that some of the pieces of the movie, like that is why they kept making movies, still work pretty well. Like Pat Morita is great as Mr. Miyagi. I mean, he just provides this really grounded performance. He's fun to watch on screen. I like him. Um, and then Ralph Macchio as Daniel. He's called upon to do some stuff that feel a little out of character in this movie, but he is a teenager, and so it's like I buy it. But by and large, I still like watching those characters. Um, but what's different in that one is that the trend that was kind of started in two of having the villains be a little bit more cartoony is just turned up to 14 here. Literally, the antagonist in this movie is an old army buddy of Kreese, the sensei, the evil Cobra Kai sensei, who basically hears, "Oh, this kid and this old man humiliated you? Well, I'm a bajillionaire with lots of free time, so I'm going to devote the next several months of my life to revenge." And this guy is ludicrous. Now, that said, he is having lots of fun on screen being a 1980s movie villain, and he is actually pretty entertaining to watch on that level. It's just a weird mesh with that part of the movie and then the more grounded stuff with Daniel and Mr. Miyagi and all of that sort of thing. And a lot of it's pretty sloppy. I feel like 3 has some interesting stuff in it, and big pieces of it are things that like I had loved when I was 12 and then forgotten all about for 25 years. Um, so that's I guess 30 years now that I think about it. Yeah. So um, that's kind of was amazing, but the movie's not nearly as good. I feel like it's watchable, but with your expectations set to knowing this one's not as good. Now, the next Karate Kid kind of unfortunately continues that slide in the sense that once again we have Pat Morita as Mr. Miyagi, and he's great. Like I like him, and we have Hilary Swank as Julie, and like she's a good actress, although she's young here and she's called upon to do some things by the script that feel a little much. But like I mean, there's some good stuff in it. There's some okay stuff in it, but a lot of it is just weird. Like she just randomly takes care of a hawk with a broken wing on the roof of her school, I guess. Um, she makes friends with this boyfriend who's supposedly in high school, and he's the guy who's, wants to stand up to the mean, ROTC guy, but just can't quite, you know, find the courage. He kind of wants to go his own way, but he's not sure. And he's also obviously like 28 years old and a bodybuilder because he's just huge. And he's supposed to be a high schooler, and it's just like, okay, well, I mean, like he's not a terrible actor. It's just like physically, it's weird that they cast him. Is all. Um, and the villains in that one just like it's basically a colonel who runs like Alpha Squad, I think is what they said it was, and it's just some sort of a high school version of an ROTC sort of thing where he teaches kids to be tough guys, and supposedly it's because he'll give them recommendations to the Air Force Academy or something. It's like, all right. And honestly, like there's some fun stuff in the movie. Like there's a bit when uh, Julie's gotten suspended, and so Mr. Miyagi takes her to this monastery that he knows, and they are hanging out with a bunch of monks for a while, and she gets to learn some cool lessons there, and like that sequence is kind of fun. And then there's also a bit in there that I actually really liked where um, the there's a song Dreams, I think, by the Cranberries, where so Julie is puts that on, and she's kind of dancing by herself in an out of the way area, and the monks come in, and she's like, oh no, because these guys are like really quiet, they don't talk much, they're very sort of serene. She worries that she's disturbing them with their music, but so she goes to turn it off, and they have her keep it on, and they start dancing to that song with her. And they don't like have them suddenly know like contemporary pop dance moves. They do their sort of dance moves, but just they kind of say like, yeah, oh yeah, we like this music too, we like music. And that's kind of fun. I like that. I like those monks. I think they're fun. They hustle the guy at bowling later, and they're so charming about it that the guy doesn't even get mad. Like I like some of that stuff, but there's also big parts of the movie, including like the climax, where it's just like a slog to get through, and it's just like none of this feels at all grounded or realistic, even within the world of the movies that has been previously established. So it's a shame that basically the sequence of quality in the movies is one is the best, then two, then three, then the next Karate Kid. But I'm glad that I rewatched all of them. So there you have it. Now I guess I'll watch Cobra Kai. Now I'll talk to you again tomorrow for 5 more minutes.